Is anybody not ready? Right. Because the NFL is probably the worst organization in professional sports, Leo and I proudly affirm today's resolution that the United States federal government should ban professional football leagues. We define this as a policy round as implied by the word should in the resolution, thus the weighing mechanisms for this round should be net benefits, meaning whichever team can prove the most good for the most amount of people should be deserving of the ballot in today's round. Secondly, one definition, we define this as American football. And football leagues are trade organizations that maintain exclusivity contracts for management between independent, unaffiliated teams. So right now there are two that are operational in the United States. There's one is the NFL. The second one is the XFL. Most of our offense is going to come off the NFL. The NFL oversees 32 independent teams divided into two conferences, the AFC and the NFC. These teams have autonomy over a lot of the management of their teams, but a lot of the doctors and the medical oversight comes from the NFL itself. That's the plan text. Plan text is that the United States federal government will ban professional football leagues. Pretty straightforward. The plan will be enacted through normal ways and means. Are there any questions on that?
No.
All right. So what does this plan actually do? The first thing it does is it means that the NFL and the XFL, which is this other league that we're not going to talk about at all in the rest of this round, basically go away. So the teams exist and the players still exist. So because the teams are entirely separate from the league and the league only exists as an oversight organization of these teams, the resolution means that we cannot get rid of these teams actually. Secondly, because these teams still exist, they're likely to transition to other types of markets. We would isolate specifically boxing as the type that they would be most likely to switch to, because the boxing market first has many parallels to the type of activity that football is, and secondly has been very established and is well proven in the United States. So the way the boxing market works is that there is a ranking organization. So this ranking organization basically just ranks teams in terms of strength. It publishes a list every week of the strongest fighters. And then after that, fighters' managers are able to contact each other and organize fights independent of the league itself. And then they're able to organize streaming opportunities with networks. Basically, it's all independent. So this has a couple advantages. The first of which is health and brain trauma. In the status quo, the NFL is basically doing everything except for endorse trauma. What they've done is they've suppressed a ton of research and supported a ton of research that denies connections between playing contact sports and CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalitis, which is a brain condition which causes excessive bleeding in the brain and is, a lot of people say, is caused by high contact. They've invested $103,000 into research that supports conclusions that the NFL causes CTE, and then $4.7 million into that which denies. So the NFL has invested a ton of money in proving that there's no link between NFL and brain trauma. Secondly, the NFLPA, the National Football League Players Association, which is the union of that NFL players belong to, actually filed a lawsuit against the NFL, supported by 2,300 other players, saying that the NFL suppressed medical treatment for them. 2,300 players is enough to fill 44 NFL teams. So there were a lot of NFL players that have been really harmed by the NFL in the past. Secondly, the NFL is just broadly a really bad organization. In Breast Cancer Awareness Month, the month of October, they sold $10 million of gear for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but only 10% of that ever actually made it to research. This is really problematic because when people are buying gear from their favorite team that they believe is going to be extra good because it supports breast cancer research, but then it doesn't even make it there, that is basically the NFL ripping people off in order to support their own organization, which is basically just a scam. Third, teams are really, really good for NFL players, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. The NFL is the organization that's responsible for issuing doctors to teams. But players, if they wish to, can bring on their own doctors if they want, if they've been treated poorly in the past. But a lot of players aren't able to pay enough for their aren't able to pay their doctors enough unless they're making a ton of money. So a lot of players that are maybe not starters or that are people on the bench, people on the practice squad, they don't make as much money as Tom Brady or Jimmy Garoppolo, who's now the highest paid player in the entire NFL. But instead, if they were to pay a separate doctor to take care of them for 16 weeks out of the year, they would not be able to do that. How does our plan solve for this? First, banning the league means that teams are able to take over management. So this is super important because the teams have a lot more money than the NFL does. But the teams right now aren't needing to support, aren't paying for players' doctors because the NFL is supporting is just like providing them with doctors. So they don't see a real incentive to transition to providing alternate sources of medical care. This is really important because once this goes away, teams are instead going to be hiring doctors that are endorsed, that are vetted, because head coaches and general managers really do care about their players. The players form the fan base forms the money, then these team managers are important from, like, they care about money ultimately. This is super important because they have a vested interest in making sure that their players stay safe, are able to play for a long time, and it's super important. In fact, we would say that you won't have these types of decisions where the NFL is able to like pressures players back onto the field. Instead, you'll have team managers instead be a little more conservative. Think about the implications. Is it really worth it for my player, my star running back, to go back onto the field if he has a tweaked ankle and risk his future success if he gets further injured, versus like the advertising revenue that the NFL is pursuing right now? A couple impacts. The first of which is reductions in trauma. The little and of this is that teams now have the autonomy to make medical decisions instead of the NFL, which we have proven in the past to be really inadequate at making these decisions. Because now people are able to make decisions with the long term in mind. If I get a concussion in football, should I instead go back out on the field 3 days later, as can happen in the current NFL concussion protocol, or should I make sure that an independent doctor who I vet make sure that my brain is okay before I go back out? Secondly is advertising revenue. Advertising revenue is super important because it's one of the main sources of revenue for the NFL. Without it going to the NFL, it takes a 75% cut of any team's revenue, and instead it would just go probably 50-50 between these two teams. This is super important because sports teams are really important for making sure that the local areas that these stadiums exist in are of high quality. We would highlight that sports stadiums are really important for making sure that sports stadiums are correlated with decreases in crime and increases in the local economies in these surrounding areas, because they make a lot of they create cultural centers for people to congregate and people to form around. So there's a lot of positive benefits that come from increasing the amount of money that these teams are getting, that they're able to give back to their community. So for all these reasons, that the NFL is just bad, that teams are super good and are going to be able to protect players' health better, and because of the economic impacts, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot.
All right.
Sorry.
Alrighty, it's going to be 3 off-case arguments and then half-case in order. Is any... Okay. Alright, is everyone ready? Yep. Start time now. The first argument is that people enjoy football. The uniqueness, tens of millions of people watch the NFL each year. According to Gallup, 60% of people consider themselves fans of the NFL. And it's not just that people choose to watch the NFL. There's actually research that sports like football make people happier. According to the North American Association of Sports Economists, 9 of the 10 happiest cities for young professionals in the United States are cities with major sports teams. And major sporting events, like football games, have been proven to improve general happiness. So the links. So they seem to say that they're not going to be getting rid of football, but here's the thing, they are. They talk about how boxing provides a model for how these teams could exist without the NFL. We're actually going to intercept this argument and return it for a touchdown. Boxing is basically dead, right? The 2 best fighters in the world for years, Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, didn't fight each other until Mayweather knew that Pacquiao's left hook wasn't good enough to knock him out, and the fight was a disappointment. The only big boxing fight recently was between a UFC fighter and a boxer, because exhibitions are the only thing that gets boxing going. There are like 10 boxers in the world who are famous. They have fights every few months. Basically, it barely happens. Every single successful sport in the world, not just the US, but the world, we can look to European soccer, is organized by leagues. That's a pretty good argument as to why these teams aren't going to be able to succeed without the NFL. The second argument as to why this is going to get rid of football is that people don't just like football because they like football. They like the prestige of the NFL. They like the rivalries between the leagues and their divisions. They like the thrill of a team winning a division championship, winning an AFC championship, winning a Super Bowl. Right? They talk about how rankings organizations are going to take over. Here's the thing. This is another argument as to why people will stop having football teams that they care about in the world of their plan. In boxing, the incentive is basically to call every single fight a championship fight, right? Because then you build up the billing. But what that means is that every single fight is a championship, and that means that the value of a championship is totally devalued. So that means that if the NFL follows a boxing format, like they talk about, then every single game will be devalued, and the major sporting events that we have identified as providing happiness to people, those are going to go away because there's no sense of grand meaning. There's no sense of the grand narrative of the football team that overcomes and wins the championship that is what people care about. So basically, the internal links here, it's just to the impacts here, basically. People being happy is an inherent good, and there are a lot more fans of the NFL than there are players in the NFL. So even if there's a slight improvement of the care of players by team doctors, which we're going to show you there's not going to be, the advantage of people being a lot more happy because these major sporting events are more enjoyable is going to outweigh them. The next argument is that of backlash. So you can basically cross-apply all the arguments as to people like football, but people specifically like football organized in the NFL. People specifically like the Super Bowl, like the AFC Championship games, like the divisions as they are organized. And what that means is that when the government bans the NFL, takes away this thing that 60% of the people are fans of, they're going to be super mad. They're going to be like really, really mad. And the links, when people are really, really mad, they tend to do bad things, like be violent, like riot. Just the impacts of the property destruction, the harm done to individual persons, and the deaths caused by riots could very well outweigh the tiny impacts that they get off of like team doctors being slightly better. So again, just in the short term, just the riots caused by the banning of the NFL could easily outweigh their entire case and be an independent reason to vote negative. The third argument is this will prevent the NCAA from paying college athletes. In the status quo, the 460,000 NCAA athletes are not allowed to be paid. But the thing is, they make money for their universities. In fact, they make so much money for their universities that universities actually build stadiums literally so that they can lose money on college sports and still be considered nonprofits, which we can see that the University of Michigan built an over 100,000 seat football stadium recently. Like, that's a public university, right? You would think that they're cash-strapped. No, actually, they had to take their football revenue that they could have been paying to the players and put it into a stadium so that they could lose money. So in the further evidence, basically all of the biggest sports stadiums in the world, except for the soccer stadium in Brazil, are college football stadiums. So what this means is that college, and the second uniqueness subpoint is that people understand now that college athletes are being exploited by the NCAA, that they are getting injured for their schools, they are making money for their schools, they are bringing alumni donations to their schools, and yet they are not getting a cent, they do not get workman's comp. If you get injured, you can just lose your scholarship, not have a cent for basically performing a full-time job for the university. So that means that people eventually are going to push the NCAA to pay their players, right? It makes sense. It's the obvious market solution. They can still make money. The players will be happier. The fans will be happier. This is the direction the NCAA is going in right now. The problem is that by banning all professional football leagues, of which the NCAA would become if they paid their football players, they foreclose on this ever happening because college football to most schools is the most important sport that they have, so they are not going to decide to make the switch and pay their players if professional football is banned, because that is their cash cow, that is where their school spirit comes from, that is where their, which is kind of sad, but whatever, that is where their alumni donations come from, and so that means that they are foreclosing on the possibility of the NCAA ever paying their athletes. Let's make sure it's clear, there are a lot more just college football players than there are NFL players, and that's not even talking about the basketball players and the baseball players and all the other athletes who would potentially be getting money in the future. So again, on the questions of scale, on the question of number of people affected, we clearly outweigh their entire case on this point alone. Okay, so on their case, again, they talk about how football would become like boxing again. That's the reason that their plan is bad. It means there are going to be fewer teams, there are going to be fewer games, and the games that happen are going to be kind of stupid spectacles. Nobody will care about them. People will be sad. People will be angry. Their lives will be less fun, and they will do bad things and potentially kill each other because people do that when they're mad. So they talk about how the NFL has suppressed CTE research. That's true, but the fact that they are able to bring up all this evidence about how much money the NFL spent on CTE research and why it's such a problem that they did that is probably pretty good evidence that we know what the problems are in the status quo and that the NFL is spending more money on research to prevent the knowledge of brain trauma. That isn't going to be an issue in the future. Then they talk about how the NFL issues team doctors and players can't bring on their own doctors. So think about this. If you're an NFL team, you're supposed to win. If you want to win, you want to have your players able to play well. If you want your players able to play well, you will either hire your own good team doctors or push the NFL to hire more good team doctors so that you can have them. Right? There's no incentive that they create that isn't created in the world of the net. They talk about how teams will have more advertising revenue, but again, any arguments they have about how things would be better because teams would be more popular or make more money are completely destroyed by the fact that the NFL is what gives football teams their popularity, what gives them their ability to make money. And so for all these reasons, I urge a neg ballot.
Cool. I'm just going to give her some work for a second. The negative case and the affirmative case in order. Any questions? Cool. Time starts now. Their first argument is that people like football. And yeah, people like football. I mean, I've lived in America for a while, it's pretty obvious, right? But the problem with this argument is specifically their analysis of what the boxing sphere is like right now. They're citing that there's no actual fights that happen among major fighters. I don't really follow boxing that closely. I'm more of an MMA fan. But I can cite you a couple of big boxing fights that happened just off the top of my head the last few months. For example, Rigondeaux versus Lomachenko is a big one, and Golovkin versus Canelo is another big one. The idea that there's no boxing fights that happen just because people don't want to fight is blatantly untrue. They happen all the time. The next argument they make is that people like rivalries, and people like the specific narratives that are built up around the kind of system that's in place. So the thing is, this is really hard to substantiate, right? You need to reach into the kind of mind of a whole bunch of football fans in order to determine if that's true or not. Additionally, we don't really know if the kind of narratives that are produced by a more kind of boxing-type structure are better. The reason why I'm not a football fan anymore and why I watch mixed martial arts is because I think the narratives that are created by that kind of organization is better. For example, I think the amount of football that's shown on television is really oversaturated. It just seems like there's games every weekend and none of them actually mean anything. What I like about mixed martial arts is specifically that there's lots of build up to every fight and fighters make their case about why I should care about their own win. And that makes it really easy for me to create internal narratives and for me to care about fights. And I'd say the exact same thing is going to happen if football transitions to this kind of model. Yes?
So if the football games are less fun than boxing, why do so many more people watch every football game than they do boxing?
I'd say it's kind of like a culture thing, right? And football might just be a better spectator sport than boxing, and it's also that a lot of parents watch football with their children, right? It's kind of a generational thing. At least that's how it was for me when I was initially introduced to football. I watched with my parents a lot, and a lot of my friends I think it's the same way. Obviously, I can't really speak to the entire football populace, but the fact of the matter is there's compelling reasons to believe that a boxing format would be more interesting for football, and there's really no good way to adjudicate between those two perspectives. The next argument they make is backlash, that people will be mad. So there's two reasons why this isn't a specifically good argument. First, people will still have football, right? And the only actual argument they make about why people will be mad is they like the current format. And that requires you buying the first disadvantage. If you don't believe the first disadvantage, you shouldn't believe this one either. Additionally, there have been changes in formats in sports in the past. For example, you have the UFC, they bought Strikeforce and Pride, which are two prominent MMA organizations. There wasn't any rioting, despite the fact that the UFC business model and kind of presentation was very different than these organizations that we're talking about. These are fight fans, right? People who actually watch fighting. If anything, they're more likely to riot. And also, the NFL and the AFL merged in the 1970s. There were no riots then, right? They need to provide you more specific empirical analysis if you're actually going to buy it. There's going to be massive property destruction. The next argument they make is that the NCAA is not going to be able to pay college football players. First, they read that NCAA isn't going to pay. That the NCAA is going to actually pay their workers in the future. The problem with this is that they don't really give you enough analysis as to why. They just say, oh, it's the logical market solution. The thing is, no, it's not for the NCAA. The NCAA doesn't want to pay people, right? And nobody else has any leverage to stop the NCAA from not paying their workers, right? The thing is, this has been an issue for a long, long time. People have been making this exact same argument for forever, and nothing has changed. In order for you to actually believe that the NCAA is going to suddenly miraculously start paying the workers in the future, they need to be doing a lot more work on this contention than what they're doing right now. Additionally, We also say that the NCAA can transition to just a sanctioning body that doesn't actually have exclusivity contracts. They wouldn't need to be a league. The next response is that colleges can pay. If it's really so logical, it's a market solution, then the NCAA doesn't need to be the body that's actually paying the athletes. Instead, it would probably be the colleges, right? Because the colleges are actually the people they're getting their scholarships from. Okay. Move on to the actual substance of the affirmative case. So, most of their arguments kind of rely on cross-applications from the disadvantages. I've already gone, pretty clearly over the disadvantages line by line, so, you can just cross-apply my arguments there. The kind of unique arguments they're making is that specifically on the brain trauma disadvantage, or the brain trauma advantage, that we already know what the problems are. The reason we can cite this stuff is reasons, why the problem is fixed already. The fact is, this fundamentally misunderstands the state of CTE research right now. The thing is, we don't actually have a diagnostic criteria for people with CTE who are actually alive. In order to determine who has CTE, we need to A, have a person die, and then B, perform an autopsy on them. The thing is, in order to actually get a kind of diagnostic criteria for a person that's alive to determine if it's actually safe for them to play football anymore, because they have such severe brain injuries, we need a lot more funding. And the NFL is really active in both not giving that funding and B, funding opposition research that says that's really not important. That's not what should we be looking at. They're actually funding legit, scientific journals. They're just selectively funding the people that will say what they want. And that really contributes to a kind of climate of research where people aren't willing to invest more in this kind of stuff because they don't see it as an issue. Yes?
Yeah. Why would individual teams also not want to make it look like they are not harming their players?
The argument specifically the NFL is able to create a lot of capital that allows them to do this kind of stuff. They get all of the cuts of the advertising revenue, and they're also immune from player pressures since they don't have direct contracts. We say if you actually see a world in which the NFL was abolished, teams would actually have to pass down the revenue they use to suppress research or whatever to players, because players would pressure them, and they don't have the kind of exclusivity deals the NFL does that passes them money no matter what their performance is. So they actually have to be more responsive to player and player desires. So after this, they don't really do a lot of analysis on the rest of the stuff that Neeraj argues, right? Neeraj makes this argument about how NFL is really horrible and it stops charity donations from actually going through because people are donating to the NFL instead of donating to other places, thinking, the NFL is going to give all this money to charity. Instead, the NFL takes a 90% cut. Additionally, they don't make any specific arguments about how team doctors are key. For those reasons, strongly urge an affirmative vote.
The order is the same order. It's disadvantages 1, 2, 3, and then the affirmative case. Is anyone not ready? Okay, I'll start my time now. The affirmative is going to lose this round because they don't do nearly enough analysis. Basically, they need to win that the boxing model is better than the current NFL model, and they just can't win that. They don't do enough responses. That's why they're going to lose. But I'm going to get right into the first disadvantage, which is that people enjoy football. Basically, they just agree with us on the description of the status quo that they say, yes, people do enjoy football. But then they basically say that people also enjoy boxing, right? He lists some fights. Now, I'm not going to try to recount what those names were. I didn't really get that, but they were just some random names that I've never heard of and you probably never heard of either, which is really good evidence that NFL is more popular than boxing, right? The fact is that he literally says there are NFL games on TV all the time. I think it's really oversaturated. Well, that's because a lot of people want to watch the NFL, right? No one wants to watch boxing. That is literally that is the best proof that NFL is more popular than boxing, that it generates them more money. Also, they can see in Amos' specific analysis that every single major sport in the world has a league. That all the most successful sports, that's like soccer, baseball, basketball, football, all have leagues around them, and that is because leagues are key to getting to having the narratives, right? They give some analysis about how there are other narratives, and that we don't know if the narratives could be better. But I think it's pretty clear that the narratives could be better, especially because of Amos' point that they totally concede that in boxing there's an incentive to call everything a championship, right? If there's no league organizing it, then you can call everything a championship. That creates really bad narratives, right? It's really powerful when your team goes through a whole season, and they have a bunch of games, and they have a bunch of grueling battles, and then they get into the playoffs, and they're able to win a championship. Now, I don't know if I used the right terminology there because I'm not a football fan, but you get what I'm saying, right? The point is that the narrative of going through a whole season and then your team making it, or your team, having a hard loss, or whatever, or, ref calls, that sort of thing, right? These are all parts of the narrative. That one giant season is much more powerful than a bunch of teams contracting individual games across the country. Now, we think that teams would be really bad at doing that, right? Which we do make that argument. But secondly, we think that even if teams are contracting games, it will never be as much. It will never be enough, and that teams will be really bad at organizing this. Next, they make the argument that the culture is why it's a better spectator sport, but they don't change the culture at all. They just ban it and then assume that people will all of a sudden say, "Oh, that's okay. We'll just get used to this." No, in fact, that I think is a really key reason why our second disadvantage, which I heard some laughter when Amos read it. I think that's actually a really, really legitimate argument. But I think it's a really key reason why that's such a big deal. Now, I just real quick before I get to that, like to extend a couple arguments that actually no, yeah. So I think I basically did. Everything there. You only have 3 responses, and they're not very good. The fact is that boxing is empirically not as successful as football. It is because of the league, and it is because of the organizational capacity. Right? That is why soccer and all the other sports are also successful. On to the second disadvantage. So the fact is that he says that they will still have football. And yes, they will still have football, but it will not be to the same extent. If you believe that the reason people like football is because of the leagues, and because of the culture, which he says football is more prevalent in our culture, right? Culture and the league are probably the most key reasons why people like football, right? But when you ban the league, the problem is that we will see huge backlash. Now, I don't think that there are going to be riots all over the country, but all it takes is one riot to outweigh all of their impacts. Think about it. If you ban football and there's one riot, that's way more property damage, and way if one person loses a life, right? That is even more. That even outweighs their impact. Because a short life expectancy versus one person being murdered in a riot, right? Even that one murder is going to outweigh the brain damage arguments, right? But even the fact is that all it takes is one riot, and that riot, right? All that property damage, all those costs, and all the injuries and lives lost will outweigh their entire case, right? So even if there's a low chance that there's a riot in any one city, a bunch of cities with a low chance of riot adds up to a high chance of riot. That at the same time, we do think that riots are going to be common, right? This is a huge shift. Now, they make the argument that there have been no riots in the past with big shifts, but here's the problem. The NFL has never been banned before, okay? We've never lost an entire league because the government took an action, okay? The backlash is going to be enormous. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before in our country, and that's why we can expect a disproportionate backlash. Yes?
Do fans care about their team existing and being able to play games, or the NFL existing?
They care about the narratives, and they care about the organizational capacity of the league, right? That's not initially what you think of when you think of, why do I like football? Right? But the fact is that without the narratives, without the league, without the organization, and also there's the perceptual thing too, right? When people see the NFL as football, and when the NFL is banned, regardless of whether the teams continue to exist, people's initial reaction is going to be, my football is banned, right? And that's basically, that can lead to a lot of bad things. But furthermore, about the NCAA arguments. So they basically say that we don't have enough analysis about why athletes will get paid in the status quo. Well, one, we give the analysis that the NCAA is constantly losing popularity as more and more people find out about this, right? This is a similar reason as to why, or this is kind of similar argument as to on their case, but I'll get to that a bit, basically about how, as more and more research comes out, it becomes more and more prevalent, and it happens at an accelerating rate. That right now we're kind of on an increase of, of people protesting against NCAA athletes not getting paid, and that is the rate at which people are protesting this is accelerating rapidly. So even if it doesn't seem like we're close to it right now, we will be in a few years. Next, this is basically only defensive, right? They don't actually say that it would be bad, or that this would be good in some way. They just say that it might not be as bad as we say, which is a reason why this is still going to be terminal offense against their case. Specifically because even if there isn't a large chance, there is still a chance that athletes will be paid right now, and they foreclose on all possibility of that. They say that there's no exclusive contracts, so that kind of fixes this whole problem. But the problem is that even if the colleges are paying, right? The colleges are paying. That makes it a professional league, right? In order to be professional, you have to be paid and be part of a league. That's the same thing, right? You can't pay the athletes in a league because professional leagues are banned. No, thank you. So with that, and also the other thing, the final argument is that they only have to decide to change it once, right? It's not like it's a long process to change the rule. They only have to change it once. So all it takes is one time for them to make the decision to switch to going the other way and paying athletes. And that means that it's much more likely. But now to their case. So they basically say that, all responses are just cross-application, so they'll just cross-apply their responses. That's not true. We make a lot of unique responses to this, but they actually don't do a very good job responding. For example, extend the argument that NFL, or that basically teams will give pressure to that. Teams have an incentive to make money, so they will still put pressure on their athletes to go play games that they shouldn't be. Specifically, we think that there's actually more pressure right now because, like they say, the NFL Players Association puts a lot of pressure on the NFL. That's a huge organized group. Whereas in the world where it dissolves, they're not going to have as strong a voice against the teams. The teams still have an attempt to make money, and in fact, if they're getting 100% of revenues, then they will take that choice too. But additionally, I like to extend the whole response to the ad revenue scenario, which they completely drop. That the NFL is what gives it the ability to succeed. But basically, the problem is that research is happening, there is a shift, and that is why, fundamentally, you cannot affirm.
All right. It'll be a very brief overview, and then 3 voter issues. Is everyone ready? I will start my time now. Because they have only a tiny chance of helping a few thousand people and risk alienating millions of people, they should lose this round. The first voter issue is that of consumer happiness. I think they concede way too much on our arguments here to be having better than to have a 51% chance of winning this argument at the end of the day. They concede that people like the Super Bowl, that they like AFC championships and NFC championships, that they like divisions, that essentially that they like the narratives going to the game. More importantly, they concede that because, specifically in the example they bring up of boxing, every fight is promoted as a championship, that means that would probably happen with the NFL, and that probably means that games would be devalued, because instead of being stepping stones on an exciting journey, they would just be like, oh, it's a championship, but no one really cares because it's like, 2 crappy teams. They also never give you an example of a professional sport that is anywhere near as popular as the NFL, that is not organized in a league, right? As Ben tells you, soccer, football, baseball, basketball, they're all organized into leagues, and they're all way more successful than boxing and UFC, which they talk about. So we think that those are all pretty good arguments that people are going to be happier with the NFL as it is. And they also give you very few reasons to believe that people would be happier with teams on their own, right? Basically, all they say is that people wouldn't completely give up on the NFL because they would still like their teams. Sure, people would still watch it, just like people still watch boxing, but it would be way fewer people. And that means that all of the impacts we get off of this argument are still true. Specifically, we tell you that major sporting events, which we tell you that NFL games comprise, make people happier in general, right? They tell you that there are a ton of football games going on. We agree, and we have shown that not only do people like to watch those games, but they are happier when those games happen, and the people in cities with NFL teams where these frequent games that they say are happening too often, they say that those people are happier. That means that they also have a risk of linking into the riots argument, right? Because we have shown lots of reasons that this potentially could piss a lot of people off, and they haven't given you any reasons that anyone would actually be happy about this decision. That means that there is still a risk of property damage, there is still a risk of people hurting each other, there is still a risk of people killing each other, right? Ultimately, you cannot give them the win on this issue because they have shown you no reason that people would be happier with teams existing on their own, and we have given you a convincing story of why sports leagues are what provide the drama, the excitement, the grand narratives that make people love the NFL so much. The next voter issue is that of player safety. So I think that this whole doctor's argument really doesn't make a lot of sense when you break it down. First, we can probably turn this because we've argued that when teams are less popular, they'll make less money, and thus they'll have less money to contract doctors, right? We have also argued, and they completely conceded this argument, that if teams wanted...
The articulation that the difference within teams and the amount of revenue that they generate will be significant enough for them not to be able to hire doctors and won't be able to get their players medical care is new in the PMR. There was no articulation made of this in any constructive, LOR, and there was no articulation for this shouldn't be waiting around.
So the argument that teams will make less money and thus be able to hire fewer doctors was made in the LOR. But it was LOC. It's up to you, but I was pretty much done with that part of the argument anyway. Okay. I will restart time. But more importantly, they concede the argument that I definitely made in the LOC, that if teams wanted better doctors, they would pressure the NFL, they would either hire those doctors on their own, or they would pressure the NFL to let them hire those doctors on their own, and thus that there's no reason to believe this is going to happen in the status quo. They also tell you that the NFL in the past stopped CTE research and that they're not funding it now, but they don't really give you a compelling story as to why anyone is going to fund CTE research in the world of the plan, and they don't really give you any compelling reason to believe that the research isn't already happening. Then finally, they concede the argument that teams will always play injured players because they're good. Rob Gronkowski will be playing with a cast in the Super Bowl no matter what because he is better than the replacement tight end. There is still an incentive for the teams to win. There will still be an incentive for them to play players when they are injured if they are good. They don't get anything under this argument. The last voting issue, which is going to directly outweigh their arguments about player safety, is the argument about money for NCAA players. So this is another one where there is only a chance that they foreclose on something good happening, and there is no chance that they cause anything good happening, right? We tell you first that the NCAA allowing payment for players is feasible because the teams make so much money that they don't know what to do with it and have to throw it away so that they can show themselves to be nonprofits. So that means that it's feasible. That already means that them foreclosing on the possibility of it happening is a reason not to do the plan. But secondly, they concede that people now see that the NCAA is exploiting its athletes, and that means that at some point it is entirely possible that the public pressure will mount to a high enough degree that the NCAA will say, fine, we'll pay these athletes. They also concede that because there are 460,000 NCAA athletes and only 1,700 NFL players, that any chance of this dissat happening outweighs their entire case. So basically, any one of the offensive arguments we bring up is big enough to outweigh their case because they only affect professional football players. They don't really give you anything that is going to be better in the world of the plan. We give you a significant number of things that could affect a lot more people than their plan ever will. For all these reasons, I urge a neg ballot.
The order will be a brief overview to the round first, followed by our brain trauma arguments, followed by, I believe, the 3 disadvantages in order, and then I'll just be talking about multiple worlds. Any questions? No. There are 2 parts to the overview. First, the league does not make the sport of football. The teams and the players do. This is a really important point for you to understand, Judge, going into your adjudication. Because when we ban the NFL, we do not ban any of the sports teams. We do not stop any of the players from playing NFL. We do not stop these games from taking place. They all still happen. All that we have happened is we get rid of the NFL. What we say steps in place is a tried and true method of boxing. They say that boxing is horrible. They say that boxing hasn't worked in the past, that boxing is going down. Leo makes really good analysis and says that this is just not true, that boxing is doing well. Here's the key part. Different sports exist among different demographics. If I were to name 5 different football players here, you likely wouldn't be able to recognize what teams they play for either. It's a very targeted section of the demographics, basically. And just because we switch models, the model's still flourishing under boxing, it'll still continue to flourish under the NFL. Secondly,
Point of order, stop time. The argument that it is specifically about demographics and that's the only reason that boxing has a different model is
so we can make the argument that big fights happen all over the place, and that the reason you just haven't heard of them is because you don't pay attention to boxing. So it's and then he names 5 different fights that he's heard because he likes combat sports.
It's up to judge's discretion.
So the second part of the overview is that the NFL oversees 32 teams. These 32 teams, let's say the top 50% of them are good, 16 teams. These 16 teams probably have 16 starting running backs. If the NFL is able to pressure its doctors to make sure that these players get on the field and are able to generate the NFL money, and if one of them gets hurt, there's no incentive for the NFL to just keep pushing this player out there. And in case he gets hurt and isn't able to play again, 17 becomes 16. They have so many players that the NFL oversees that they don't value each player individually as much as the teams do. The teams, however, value their players a lot more than any individual team. Each team has 1 star running back. If the star running back gets injured for the season or injured for life, they now have to go to the drawing board and figure out how to trade for another player or draft another player, which is a huge investment and really changes the trajectory of a team, possibly for the rest of the franchise history. That is why
Point
teams...
of order, stop time. The argument that you would have to draft a new player and that would, change the team's trajectory forever is entirely new analysis.
Okay,
I specifically make the argument in my speech that because teams are more responsive to their players, once you don't have the NFL, that's going to be more player leverage and teams will look after their players more. That's analysis that comes out of my speech here, so it's just extending that.
We've been saying that teams care about their players for the entire round, and this just we say reasons why. Judge discretion. Because of those reasons, teams are very likely to invest in making sure that their players stay safe and stay out on the field. Let's go to the specific line by line of our arguments. The specific argument that they make is that there is no reason why CTE research isn't happening in the status quo. We say that CTE research is being impeded by the $4.3 million that the NFL is throwing at it every single year. This is really problematic because there's no understanding of how CTE actually affects people as their lives progress. We're only able to see how CTE affects people once they're dead, and at that point it's too late to change anything about the way these players are playing football and the way that they live their lives. It is super important, and there's so much growth that is able to be done in the area of CTE research that we're not doing right now that the NFL is getting in the way of. They say that this is not important, that it only affects 2,200 people, and how this is like something that should be just disregarded. This is, the truth of the matter is, Judge, that these players have the right to understand, they have the right to medical attention. They have a right to make sure that they get informed decisions in order to they get accurate information to make the most informed decisions about their health. That is super important, both as a precedent and as a right that these players have. So when they make analysis that it's probably less important than one individual dying in some riot that possibly can occur, which I'll be getting to later, that is probably not true just in terms of weighing, because of the way that it changes their lives and the way that it impedes on their rights. Secondly, they say that with regards to advertising revenue, how this is just going to go away because the NFL going away means the entire sport of football goes away. Time and time again, we show you how this is false, how the switch to the model is still going to allow football to take place and football to be aired on television to generate revenue for the teams, and in fact generate more revenue for the teams than is happening right now. This is super important because this revenue is what pays for players' doctors. This revenue is what's important for making sure that the players are able to get the health and security that they need. Let's go on to the specific arguments that they make, and I'll be pointing out how we outweigh and why this is important. The first argument that they make is that people enjoy football. This is where they make the arguments that boxing is flawed. You can remember the arguments that Lee's been making, that big fights happen all over the place, people follow boxing, and it's been working. There's no specific reason why they would go away. We talk about rivalries and how being these long-term things, this build-up, this intensity that comes associated with fights is what gets players riled, what gets fans invested in these narratives, as opposed to a week-by-week check-in with your team on how are they doing, oh, we're losing, things like that. That these narratives is what engross people in boxing, why it's specifically probably better than the NFL narrative. Secondly, on backlash. You can extend the analysis that says that we changed formats before, that we got rid of the AFL and now we have just the NFL, that the football leagues have been disbanded in the past, no riots. Then secondly, they say that the NFL specifically has never been banned. We don't get rid of football. People care about football. They really don't care about the NFL. They care about the existence of their teams, the safety of their players, and that the fact that football exists. Finally, they said that the NCAA is really important. The issue over here is, first, we make the analysis that the NCAA is never going to be able to pay their players. First, there's no movement to do so in the status quo. There's no reason why that's going to change. Second, because it's just really unfeasible. So for all those reasons, that CTE is a huge problem, that the NFL is this really scummy organization in putting that under the rug, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot in this round.